Ernesto Vergara, a 50-year-old remote sensing specialist, was reviewing old satellite images of the Tarragona region on that sunny June afternoon in 1997. He worked in his quiet home office, surrounded by maps and monitors, analyzing changes in land use for a new territorial planning project. Outside, birds were singing and a light breeze rustled the curtains, creating a deceptive sense of peace. That's when it happened. Comparing images from 1985 and 1995, Ernesto noticed an anomaly. On the edge of a pine forest, a circular clearing appeared to have formed, about 5 meters in diameter. It was as if someone had carefully removed all the vegetation and compacted the ground. At first, Ernesto thought it was just an image distortion or a natural change in the landscape, but when he zoomed in, his heart skipped a beat. He clearly saw the silhouette of a metallic object, partially covered by fallen leaves. This object looked like part of something bigger, something unnatural. What he found had been hidden there for 12 years. The object's condition in the picture indicated that it had been exposed to the elements for a long time, but its shape remained recognizable. And most alarmingly, this discovery would forever change a 12-year-old mystery that had plagued a small village outside Tarragona. Ernesto had no idea that this ordinary day would become the most disturbing day of his life. What was about to be discovered had remained hidden for years, waiting for this moment. In a few minutes, a decades-long mystery would finally be revealed. Tarragona would never be the same after this discovery. It was a warm summer in 1985. Rural Spain was enjoying its usual, peaceful rhythm, especially in small villages such as the one on the outskirts of Tarragona. The days were long and sunny, and the nights were filled with the chirping of cicadas. In this picturesque location, among olive groves and pine forests, stood the ancient church of Santa Clara. Its stone walls had witnessed countless weddings and celebrations. Javier Molina, a 27-year-old agronomist, and Lucia Ferrer, a 25-year-old primary school teacher, were the heart and soul of the village. Javier, with his weathered face and strong hands, was known for his love of the land and his knowledge of local crops. Lucia, with her bright smile and kind eyes, was loved by all her students and colleagues. Their relationship was as deeply rooted as the old olive trees surrounding their home. Everyone knew that they were made for each other. They had grown up together in this village. Their families were longtime friends. Their wedding was a long-awaited event, a celebration that brought the whole community together. The children from Lucia's school brought wildflowers. Javier's neighbors prepared traditional dishes. It was a day of pure happiness, a symbol of hope and the future for the entire village. Their wedding took place at noon in the church of Santa Clara. The sun streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the interior with vibrant colors. As Javier and Lucia exchanged vows, the whole village was there. Their faces shone with joy and pride. After the ceremony, a lavish banquet followed in the old village hall. Music, laughter, and dancing continued late into the night. Everyone congratulated the newlyweds, wishing them a long and happy life. As the clock struck midnight, Javier and Lucia said goodbye to their guests. Their eyes shone with exhaustion, but also with boundless happiness. They promised to visit everyone as soon as they returned from their short honeymoon, which was planned in the mountains. They got into their wedding car, an old blue seat, which Javier had lovingly restored for the occasion. It was decorated with ribbons and flowers hanging from the rearview mirrors. The car set off down the dusty country road, leaving behind a cloud of dust and waving guests. It was the last time they were seen alive. The next morning, when the newlyweds didn't show up for the traditional family breakfast, it caused slight concern. At first, everyone thought they had simply decided to extend their honeymoon or were delayed by some unforeseen stop. But as the hours passed and there was no news from them, anxiety began to mount. Lucia's parents called Javier's house, but no one answered. They called the hotel in the mountains that they knew the newlyweds had booked, but they said that Javier and Lucia hadn't arrived. By noon that day, it became clear that something serious had happened. The Guardia Civil was immediately notified. The search began with relentless urgency. Agents combed the roads that the newlyweds were supposed to have used. They contacted hospitals and police stations in neighboring towns. No traces, no news. 24 hours after their disappearance, Javier and Lucia's wedding car was found. It was abandoned on a lonely country road, just a few kilometers from the village, near the entrance to a dense pine forest. The doors were slightly ajar, and the keys were still in the ignition. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle. Nothing was missing. It looked as if Javier and Lucia had simply gotten out of the car and vanished into thin air. The Guardia Civil, with the support of local volunteers, began a massive search. They scoured the nearby forests, ravines, and coastal area. Dogs were brought in, but they quickly lost the scent near the car, as if the couple had simply evaporated. Divers searched the nearby bodies of water. Drones didn't exist at that time, but helicopters flew over the area for several days. All the wedding guests and all the villagers were questioned. No one had seen anything, no one had heard anything. The mystery deepened with each passing hour. Questions remained unanswered. What happened to Javier and Lucia? Why did they abandon their car? Who could have harmed them? An enigma began to form, casting a long shadow over the once serene village. Weeks passed, then months. Despair turned into dull pain, and then into quiet, constant melancholy. The mystery of Javier and Lucia's disappearance became part of the village's everyday life, an unseen but palpable burden. The newlyweds' parents never lost hope, but their faces became increasingly gaunt with each passing day. People stopped talking about it out loud, but it was always in their minds like an invisible shadow hanging over everyone. 12 years is a long time. A long silence swallowed the truth. The case was archived as unsolved, another name on the long list of missing persons across Spain. Occasionally, a new, enthusiastic agent would review the case, hoping to find something that his predecessors had missed. But it always ended in the same disappointment. There were no new clues, no new witnesses, only emptiness. But what no one knew was that Javier and Lucia hadn't simply disappeared. They were the victims of a carefully planned, sinister act. On that fateful evening when they left their wedding, they were being followed. About 2 kilometers from the village, as they drove along a secluded country road, they were suddenly stopped by a van. 2 people in dark clothing got out of the van. Their faces were hidden. Javier, despite the shock, tried to resist. He was determined to protect Lucia, but they were stronger. First him, then Lucia were dragged out of the car and forced into the van. They had no time to scream or understand what was happening. The target was Javier. Lucia was simply an unwanted witness. The Molina family owned large agricultural lands in the area, and Javier, as an agronomist, had recently discovered something disturbing. He had come across evidence of illegal dumping of toxic waste on land that he believed was abandoned, but actually belonged to a powerful construction company. This company was secretly working on a major project that could bring it huge profits if its activities weren't exposed. This construction company, known as Construcciones Salvador, was much more than just a construction firm. It had deep ties to local authorities and even to some influential figures at the regional level. Its director, Marco Salvador, was a ruthless man, used to getting what he wanted at any cost. He learned about Javier's discovery through one of his corrupt contacts in the local council. He couldn't allow this information to surface. The victims were taken to a remote warehouse located on the outskirts of Tarragona, belonging to Salvador's company. There, they were held for several days. Javier, despite his exhaustion, refused to cooperate. He didn't give up his sources. He didn't name names. Lucia, despite her fear, supported him. Their love was their strength, but their resistance was futile. Salvador decided that they had to disappear without a trace. It was Marco Salvador who gave the order. He wanted them buried where they would never be found, in a place that only a few people knew, deep in the dense pine forest, where only one forbidden path led. It was an old hunting trail, long abandoned and overgrown. He was sure that no one would ever reach that place. A specific part of the forest was chosen, deep in the thicket. This place was known only to a few, mostly old gamekeepers who no longer lived in the village. It was the perfect place to hide a crime. One cold night, a week after their kidnapping, Javier and Lucia were brought there. They were weak, but their eyes were still burning. When they were ordered to climb down into a newly dug pit, Lucia grabbed Javier's hand. They met their terrible fate together. The next morning after the burial, Marco Salvador personally made sure that the area was camouflaged. He ordered his crew to remove any traces. They used heavy machinery to compact the ground and then sowed it with local plants to make it look like a natural clearing. They even placed some old metal debris to divert attention if anyone ever stumbled upon the place. They were confident that the secret would remain buried forever. For many years, Marco Salvador lived enjoying his wealth and power. His construction company flourished. No one suspected him in the disappearance of Javier and Lucia. He was a ruthless but clever man. He never left traces. He was convinced that his secret would remain undiscovered. Meanwhile, the village continued to live its life, but the shadow never disappeared. Every year, on the anniversary of the disappearance, Javier and Lucia's families held a small memorial service in the Church of Santa Clara. They lit candles and remembered their children. They never lost hope for the truth, but the years had turned that hope into a faint, flickering spark. Ernesto Vergara, the remote sensing specialist, was a methodical and meticulous man. His job was to look for anomalies, to detect the slightest changes in the landscape that could indicate something bigger. It was this mindset that led him to the discovery. His attention was drawn to that strange circular clearing. Ernesto's intrigue grew with each hour as he studied the images. He knew that this type of landscape change, a perfectly circular clearing, wasn't natural. It was the work of man. But what could be there, and why was it so carefully camouflaged? He felt that he had stumbled upon something important. He couldn't dismiss this feeling. He decided to contact his old friend, Sergeant Fernando Rodriguez of the Guardia Civil. Fernando, who was now 59 years old, was on the verge of retirement. He was an experienced agent who had spent his entire career serving his country. He was one of those who had participated in the original search for Javier and Lucia many years ago. The case remained in his memory as one of the most frustrating. Ernesto called Fernando that same evening. He explained to him what he had found in great detail. Fernando was skeptical at first. He had seen many false leads over the years, but Ernesto's persistence and the accuracy of his descriptions convinced him. Fernando felt a faint twinge of curiosity, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He promised to take a look at it. The next morning, Fernando Rodriguez arrived at Ernesto's house. They spent several hours reviewing the satellite images together. The longer Fernando looked, the more convinced he became that Ernesto was right. Something was wrong with that clearing. He decided that they should visit the site in person. Fernando requested permission to use a helicopter. For such an old, closed case, this was unusual, but he used his old contacts. Permission was granted. That same day, on a very cold and windy afternoon, they flew by helicopter over the pine forest. From above, the clearing was even more obvious. The helicopter descended, allowing them to see the details. They saw that there was indeed a recently opened trench in the clearing, now overgrown with moss, and next to it were remains that looked like human bones. Fernando's heart pounded. He knew that this could be the breakthrough they had been waiting for decades. The helicopter landed in a small clearing nearby. Fernando and Ernesto, accompanied by a small group of agents and forensic experts, headed to the site. As they approached, the smell of damp earth and pine needles filled the air. The metallic object that Ernesto had noticed in the satellite image turned out to be a fragment of old wedding decoration, perhaps a piece of ribbon or part of a floral arrangement that had fallen off the car. It was rusty and deformed, but its origin was undeniable. Forensic experts began their work, carefully excavating the soil. With each layer removed, it became more and more obvious that this was a burial site. After several hours of painstaking work, they found them. The remains of two human bodies, buried very close to each other. Next to them were found small pieces of fabric that appeared to be part of a wedding dress and suit. The results of the forensic examination were not long in coming. DNA analysis, at that time a relatively new technology, confirmed that the remains belonged to Javier Molina and Lucia Ferrer. Their nightmarish disappearance was no longer a mystery. It became a case of double murder. This discovery shocked Fernando to the depths of his soul. He knew these young people. He remembered their wedding, and now he was standing over their grave. This discovery forever changed the course of the case. What seemed like a simple disappearance turned into a dark community secret. Who knew about this area of the forest, accessible only by forbidden trails? And, most alarmingly, what motives led to the fact that two newlyweds were buried alive in a forest that everyone considered harmless? Fernando Rodriguez knew that he now faced one of the most important tasks of his career. He had to solve this mystery. He was determined to bring justice to Javier and Lucia. He was determined to finally give peace to their families. He felt the weight of a 12-year-old lie. He felt the burden of silence. The discovery of Javier and Lucia's remains triggered a chain reaction in the Guardia Civil. The case was immediately reopened. Now that the bodies had been found, they had a starting point. Fernando Rodriguez, feeling the weight of years of mystery, took the case into his own hands. He was determined to leave no stone unturned. Fernando's first task was to carefully examine the crime scene. He noticed several details that had been missed during the initial examination. The soil around the grave was unusually compacted, and there was no vegetation around it that was characteristic of that part of the forest. This indicated that the site had been prepared in advance. Then Fernando began to review old files, trying to find something that could link Javier to something dangerous. That's when he came across a land inspection report that Javier had submitted a few weeks before his wedding. The report mentioned suspicious chemical traces on a piece of land that Javier suspected was being used for illegal waste dumping. The site was very close to where the bodies were found. The name of the construction company listed in the report immediately caught Fernando's attention: Construcciones Salvador. This company was known for its ties to the local administration, and its director, Marco Salvador, was a man who inspired fear. Fernando decided that he had to investigate him. The investigation took several weeks. Fernando questioned former company employees who had resigned over the past 12 years. Some of them were frightened, some of them were cautious, but one of them, an old engineer named Ramon, finally decided to speak. Ramon, who was now 70 years old and seriously ill, didn't want to die without telling the truth. Ramon told Fernando about Marco Salvador. He described him as a ruthless man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. He also spoke about a major project that Salvador was secretly developing in 1985. The project involved the construction of a large residential complex, but he needed land for that. He learned that Javier Molina, thanks to his agricultural knowledge, had discovered the illegal dumping of toxic waste on the land that Salvador wanted to acquire. Ramon, with tears in his eyes, confessed that he was one of those who was present at the kidnapping of Javier and Lucia. He told how they were dragged into a van, how they were held captive in Salvador's warehouse. He confirmed that Salvador personally gave the order to get rid of them, and he told how they were buried alive in the forest.
Ramon's shocking revelation shook Fernando.
It was even more terrible than he could have imagined. It wasn't just a random tragedy. It was a premeditated, cruel murder committed for money and power. It was an institutional conspiracy carefully concealed for years. Ramon had proof. He kept an old notebook in which he recorded all of Salvador's illegal operations. The notebook contained dates, locations, and even the names of Salvador's accomplices. There was also an entry about the Molina problem with the exact burial site. He had lived with this secret for 12 years, and his conscience constantly tormented him. Fernando immediately brought Ramon to the Guardia Civil station. Ramon's testimony was recorded. The notebook was seized. He said that he could not die without telling the truth. He said that they had threatened him, but now it didn't matter. He said that the families deserved to know what really happened. This was the last piece of the puzzle. The Guardia Civil, based on Ramon's testimony, immediately issued an arrest warrant for Marcos Salvador. He was found in his luxurious mansion, shocked and angry. He tried to deny everything, but the evidence was irrefutable. Ramon's notebook was more than enough proof. Salvador's other accomplices were also arrested. Their names were also in the notebook. News of the unveiling of the mystery quickly spread through the village. The shock was universal. No one could have imagined that such terrible events could have occurred in their peaceful community. Javier and Lucia's families were devastated, but at the same time they were relieved. Finally, they knew the truth. Their pain was unbearable, but now they could begin the healing process. The arrest of Marco Salvador and his accomplices was a shock to the entire region. News of their crimes spread throughout the country. The trial was long and complex, but the evidence presented by Fernando Rodriguez and Ramon was irrefutable. Marco Salvador was sentenced to life imprisonment. His accomplices received long prison sentences. Justice finally prevailed. For Javier and Lucia's families, it was a moment of bitter relief. They had gone through years of uncertainty, pain, and despair. Now that the truth had been revealed, they could mourn their children properly. There was a new funeral worthy and farewell. This time, the bodies of Javier and Lucia, who were reburied in the local cemetery next to their ancestors, the entire village came to pay their respects. The consequences of the revelation were profound. The reputation of Construcciona Salvador was completely destroyed. The company was closed, and its assets were confiscated to compensate the affected families. The investigation also revealed corruption in local authorities, and several officials were dismissed or held accountable for their involvement in Salvador's activities. The town was forced to face its own shadows. The village, which was once a symbol of peace and innocence, was now forever changed. Trust had been undermined. People became more cautious, more suspicious, but it also led to a new sense of unity. The villagers rallied to support each other, to rebuild their communities. The burial site of Javier and Lucia in the pine forest became a memorial. The village erected a small stone monument with their names, surrounded by flowers. The place that was once a symbol of horror has now become a place of remembrance and reflection. People visited it to honor the memory of the newlyweds, to remember the fragility of life and the importance of truth. In addition to Javier and Lucia, other victims of the illegal dumping of waste by Marco Salvador also received compensation. The land was cleared, and the environment was restored. It was a long, difficult, and painful healing, but it was necessary. The story of Javier and Lucia became a reminder that even in the most peaceful places, dark secrets can hide. It became a testament to the importance of never giving up in the search for truth, even when all hope seems lost. It also highlighted that institutional power, when it becomes corrupt, can be devastating. Fernando Rodriguez, who was preparing to retire, remained in his post for another year to complete the case. He felt that he had fulfilled his duty. He had restored justice for Javier and Lucia. He had given peace to their families. His last act before retiring was to visit the grave of the newlyweds. He left a bouquet of white flowers and stood in silence for a minute, reflecting on all the lives that had been touched by this tragedy. Years passed after the unveiling of the mystery of Javier and Lucia. The village gradually recovered, but the scars remained. The parents of the newlyweds, aged and weakened, found solace in the fact that their children had finally found peace. They continued to visit their graves, telling stories about the happy times, about the laughter and love that they shared. The story of Javier and Lucia became part of local legend, a warning and a lesson about the hidden darkness that can lurk even in the most serene places. It became a reminder of the fact that justice, however long it takes, will always find its way. It became a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find truth even after many years of silence. This case also emphasized the importance of never leaving a case unsolved. It showed that even the oldest, most forgotten secrets can be revealed with persistence and new technologies. Satellite images, which seemed like ordinary images of the Earth, became the key to unlocking a terrible crime. Today, the village lives its life, but every year, on the anniversary of the disappearance of Javier and Lucia, the villagers gather at their grave. They light candles and silently reflect on the fate of two young people who were so unfairly deprived of their future. The story of Javier and Lucia continues to resound, reminding everyone of the price of secrets and of the undeniable power of truth. It is a tragedy that mingled with a glimmer of hope, a deep sadness that still finds its place in the hearts of all who remember.